Welcome to Cooking on the Kenai. Today I'd like to show you how to make a double crust apple pie. On my counter I have 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour in my bowl. I am going to add a teaspoon of salt and blend that into my flour. To that I am going to add 2/3 of a cup of shortening. You can choose to use butter shortening if you prefer the flavor. That is what I like. I like the buttery flavor that it gives my pie crust. You need to cut in your shortening into the flour. You can do that one of 3 ways. You can use a fork like I am doing. You could take 2 butter knives and cut it in like this. Or you can use a pastry blender to cut in your shortening. I prefer to use a fork. This is how I have cut in shortening ever since I first started cooking. You need to cut this in until it is all the same size. So your shortening should be the size of meal or cornmeal. It should look all the same size. As this takes a little while, I have a bowl of it already completed. Okay, so as you can see, it's all the same size. To this, I'm going to add ice water to bind it together. Make sure you do not get any ice cubes in your pie dough, as this will cause problems when you roll it out. The recipe calls for 5 to 7 tablespoons of water. I am going to start with 3 tablespoons of ice water and stir that in. Pie crust gives a range of liquid to add, a range of water to add, because it makes a difference in the temperature and humidity of the air and the flour itself for how much it will absorb. Once you have stirred in those 3 tablespoons, as you can see, it's still really dry. So I am going to go ahead and add 2 more tablespoons of ice water and stir that in. There are times when you will use just what it calls for, 5 to 7 tablespoons. Other days you may use 8 to 10. It all just depends. As you can see, this is starting to form some balls or clumps of dough. I'm still going to add another 2 tablespoons because I know from past experience that this is not anywhere close to where I want it to be. You need to stir this around well until it will form a ball of dough. So I'm going to start adding oops, that had an ice cube in it. That wasn't good. I'm going to start by just adding a tablespoon at a time now as I stir this in, because I'm getting more clumps in my dough. Don't dump it all in one spot. Kind of drizzle it around the dough. Once you get to this stage, you need to stir it quite a bit before you add more, so that that moisture has a chance to disperse all throughout the pie crust mixture. As you can see, this is starting to ball up, but it's still got a few dry pieces in the bottom, and so I'm going to add roughly half to 1 teaspoon more water to my dough, and I'm going to stir that around. As you can see, it has now formed basically a ball. There's no dry spots and those types of things. When I touch this, it is moist but not sticky. I have on my counter this wonderful little pastry mat here. It is also covering a damp towel. I have the damp towel under it to keep my mat from moving around when I roll out my pie dough. If you don't have a damp towel, you could also use one of these mats that you can put in the bottom of your kitchen drawers. Okay, I have some extra flour here that I'm going to put a little bit down on my pastry mat. What's nice about my pastry mat is it has circles for if you want to roll out an 8-inch pie, a 9-inch pie, or a 10-inch pie. I'm going to cover my rolling pin in flour, and then I'm going to take my ball of dough here that I have, and I am going to divide it roughly in half, with one half being slightly larger than the other, because this will form my bottom crust. I'm going to form this into a disc, trying not to handle it very much, because the more you handle it, the more heat from your hands gets into the shortening and melts it. And that is not what you want. You want firm shortening so that it will make your pie crust flaky. Now you roll this out from the center outward in all directions until you get it to the size you need. Try not to have too much flour on your board, as it makes your pie crust dry again. Okay, so I'm going to roll this out until I have it large enough to cover my pie pan. If you don't have one of these handy little mats, you can just measure your pie pan and measure your dough by putting your pie pan over the top of it. It should be roughly 2 inches larger all the way around. To get this up, take a leveling spatula and you're going to rub it directly on that mat to get it to go underneath this and pull it up. There are 2 types of leveling spatulas you can use, a regular flat one or an offset. I prefer the offset. It makes it easier to keep it flat on the surface of the mat. Slide it under and flip this over, being careful not to stretch your dough as you do so. Once you get it in half, you are going to fold it into quarters like this. Place it in your pie pan. Put the center of your dough in the center of your pan and gently, carefully unfold your dough. As you can see, it is not down in the corners of my pie pan. So I am going to lift my pie dough around the edges and push it into my pie pan. To get it down into the corner. You do not want to stretch your dough because it will cause it to shrink when it bakes. As you can see over here, I've got kind of a boo-boo. I've got a hole in it. So I'm going to take a little bit of water and I'm going to put these 2 pieces together, because flour and water will form a paste and hold it together. This is going to be a 2-crust pie. So unlike the first pie crust demonstration I had done, I am going to be doing a couple of different things to show you how to do a double crust pie. Once you have your dough in your pan, you need to cut around about a 1/2 inch down on the edges, all the way around your pie. Now what this does is it gives you some tucking room to keep your pie crust or your filling in your pie from overflowing as much, because you're going to end up tucking your top edge underneath this. We're going to set this pie crust aside and roll out the top dough. First thing I need to do is put down just a smidge more flour so that I can roll out that top dough. I do not want a big pile of it, so I'm going to put that over to the side. Roll my rolling pin again so it's nice and covered, and take my pie dough out of my bowl, put it into my disc, turn it over, and roll it out. You want this at least as big as what you had the first time. Well, you don't need it quite that big. You need it at least 10 inches across so that you have folding room on all the sides. This is a 9-inch pie that I am making. So I have got this rolled out fairly thin, and it's about 1 inch bigger all the way around. So for right now, I'm done with my pie crust. You need to have your top crust rolled out before you start adding your filling to your pie. I am going to take my pie crust and I am going to fold it into quarters and set it aside while I do my apples. So it is ready to go for when I do my apples. At this point, you need to do your apples. There are a lot of varieties that are good for pie. I prefer the Granny Smith because it's tart. Other apples that are good for pie that hold their texture when you bake them are Honey Crisps. They're a little sweeter than the tart Granny Smith. Braeburns, Cortlands, Jonagolds, Golden Delicious, Jonathan's, or Melrose. You need 5 medium to large apples. Make sure you've washed them and taken off the stickers. I have this wonderful apple peeler slicer corer gadget that I love to use. If you don't have one of these, you can always peel and core and slice by hand. With this machine, you take and push this lever down, and that releases this turning gadget to allow you to put your apple on. You need to use the stem end of the apple, and it goes on the 3 prongs. You have to be careful with this apple peeler because it's got 3 blades. This is a blade to help peel it. This is a blade right here to core it, and this is a blade that slices the apple. So I'll show you how that works. I always keep a bowl handy to put all the apple peels and cores into. As you can see, this is peeling, it is slicing, and it is coring my apple. You need to make sure that you push your apple clear through until this metal tip goes all the way through the machine. You pull this off the apple machine, and you have peeled and cored and sliced your apple. It's kind of like a slinky. To finish this up, you need to peel this off, or I'll just cut this off. Slice it here. Take the rest of your peeling off. Peeling gets really tough in the oven. Cut out any blemishes or the blossom end of your apple. Look down in the center of the apple so that you can see where the seed parts are that are kind of hard, and slice right next to those. I slice my apples about 1 inch to 1.5 inches wide. And once you've found all those apple seed holders, you can cut those out as you slice it into your 1 inch, 1.5 inch pieces. This one happens to have 2 of them. So now you have 5 peeled, cored, and sliced apples. And now we'll make our filling. Be sure to have your oven preheating to 400 degrees. The ingredients for the filling include 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour for the thickening agent, 3/4 cup of sugar. I prefer to use brown sugar as it adds a better flavor, in my opinion. Make sure you've crumbled it up a little bit. Add a teaspoon of cinnamon. In our household, we like cinnamon, so I usually keep it. And 1/8 teaspoon of nutmeg. If you don't have 1/8 teaspoon, just use your 1/4 teaspoon and add about half of it. You need to blend this together so that your flour is incorporated and your spices are incorporated into your sugar. Sometimes I like to just use my hands. It goes faster. Once it is all blended and all one color, you take and dump this, pour this over the top of your apples. For me, it has always been easier to mix this together with my hands. One, I can separate my apple slices that I have gotten off my core peeler slicer, and it just makes it easier to combine, especially when I didn't put it in a big enough bowl. Whenever you are doing something like this, a good cook tastes what she's making or he's making to make sure it's seasoned enough. I think that is perfect. I'm ready to dump this into my pie shell after I go wash my hands. Okay, so now we add our filling to our pie. Notice how liquidy these apples have gotten. And you need to, that's why you don't add the don't add the sugar to the apples until you are ready to pour it into the pie. I like to heap mine up because apples have a tendency to shrink as they cook. So I'm going to add just a few more for the top. If I have leftovers, I'll put them in my extra dough that I have. My oven timer, or my oven preheat just went off, so it is now up to temperature. So I've got my apples in. I have 2 tablespoons of butter that I have cubed up into little pieces. And you can choose not to add this if you would like. It just adds a lot of richness to your pie. Ooh, some of those are kind of big. Break those in half. And if you choose not to use all 2 tablespoons, that's all right too. Some people like to add cheddar cheese to their apple pies. Other people, or actually me, at times I will put in cranberries so that it's a cranberry apple pie. It's very good. Okay, from here you need to take a little bit of your water and pat it around the outside edge of your pie crust to help seal it to the top crust. So you are making sure that that edge is damp all the way around. Take your top crust, lay it centered in your pie, gently unfold it, sometimes this is interesting to do. Gently unfold it, adjust as necessary to make sure that it's all covering your pie, like that. And you want to press these outside edges together to help seal in your apple filling. Remember that 1/2 inch that we left on the edges. Now you're going to take the top crust and fold it underneath that edge. So you're going to fold that top crust underneath that edge and bring it up tall on the side of your pie. And then we will flute our pie. The height of the side will also help keep your pie from overflowing in the oven. That's why you tuck the top crust underneath. Okay, so now I'm going to flute it. I take my fingers, my index fingers, and set them side by side and flute it with my thumb in between. Other people do it different ways. But I prefer a tall side on my apple pies or any of my fruit pies so that I don't get a lot of pie filling in my oven spilling over. Okay, once you have your pie fluted, you need to trim off that extra pie crust that is hanging down from your fluting. Like that, all the way around, because that will just burn in your oven, which would not be good. You need to cut steam vents in the top of any fruit pie that has a double crust because it allows the steam to escape instead of having your pie crack open on its own. To cut steam vents, you can just take a paring knife, a butter knife, or whatever, and poke some holes in the top. I like to do a design on the top of my pie that looks like what's in it. Often at holidays, I was the pie baker, so I would have 3 to 4 different types of pie that I made. So since this one is an apple pie, I am going to cut an apple and then poke a few extra holes for ventilation. My grandmother always used 1/2 and 1/2 cream or milk on the top of her pie to help brown it. So I do that still. I take and brush a little cream, 1/2 and 1/2, whatever you happen to have handy, on the top of your pie, and then sprinkle it with a little bit of granulated sugar. It also sweetens that top crust up to make it taste very yummy. Okay, one of the last things you need to do before you put this in the oven is to make a cover for these edges so they don't burn. Take 3 to 4 pieces of foil that you have cut into 2 to 3 inch pieces. Put them together and fold them over 3 to 4 times at about 1/4 inch. And then you're going to take the next one and do the same thing. 2, 3, 4. We'll see if this is going to be big enough. Nope, I need that extra one. Okay, so now I'm going to just take this and wrap it around my pie crust and fold it gently over my fluting like this. If you happen to have a pie drip pan, put your pie on this now. If you don't have one of these, do not line your oven with foil because it will not allow your pie to cook evenly on the bottom. We're going to put this in the oven at 400 degrees for 45 minutes or until it's golden brown, and when you put a knife in your crust to the apples are tender. I have my pie in the oven and I've set my timer for 45 minutes. Your baking time may vary depending on how your oven heats. Some heat cooler, some heat warmer. So you will just need to go by color on your pie. I have taken my extra pie dough and rolled it out and placed it into my pan. I'm going to take all the extra apples that I had and just place them in here also. And to form what they call a galette. Spread these out, and then I'm going to just take my crust and pinch it over the top of my apples. Normally galettes are formed on a cookie sheet, but I don't want this to overflow in my oven, so I have put it in a spare pie pan. I'm going to add a couple of pieces of butter to the top and put this in the oven and bake it along with my pie. Hope you enjoy. It's been an hour and I just took my pie out of the oven. As you can see, my top crust is nicely browned. Taking off my foil, the fluted edges are browned, but not over browned. I've got bubbling up from the apple juice right here, and my galette is also nicely browned and tender when I poke my knife in it, and my apples are tender in my pie. You can serve your pie hot out of the oven, but your filling will not have set. It's best to let it cool. Thanks for watching Cooking on the Kenai.